Now, we're going to switch topics for a while. I want to talk about race. And Robert George is here from the New York Post, but let's watch this first.
The United States continues to wrestle with the legacy of race and slavery and segregation. That's still there.
All right, that's the president, of course, in Malaysia last week, joining us right here in studio, not from Malaysia or anywhere else, not even at the offices of the New York Post, where he's editorial writer. Also writes, of course, for National Review, Reason, Huffington Post, is Robert George. Good to see you.
Good to be here, Steve.
Yeah,
thank you.
All right, well, let's talk about you. You wrote a great piece about this week in racism, and the issue of race is not as simple as it appears to be. Does the tone get set in this case, where we are now as a country? Is the tone set from the top? Is the president dividing us more than we've been divided in recent history along racial lines?
I don't think so. I mean, I think as far as they went, I thought the president's comments, I think were fairly straightforward. I mean, there is a legacy of racism and so forth, and segregation and so forth, and we see some of the impact of it in some of our public schools and things like that. So there's a lot of things that going to have to be addressed. But too often we kind of fall into, these kind of typical arguments that don't really address some of the problems that there are now. We get into the argument over Clive Bundy talking about whether blacks were better off as slaves than in welfare, or we get involved in the Donald Sterling issue. Whereas there are some real actual aspects dealing with the legacy of slavery and Jim Crow and things like that, but we end up getting stuck on some of these slightly more complicated side issues.
The side issues that become marquee issues, that have marquee value, so to speak. The Donald Sterling in the NBA is another one. The Duck Dynasty star is another one.
Well, exactly. I mean, these are the kinds of, I mean, Clive Bundy and Donald Sterling, regardless of how offensive or reprehensible their comments may have been, they don't have actual impacts on public policy. A wealthy individual in a rather successful firm such as the NBA obviously has a lot of financial power and so forth, and there's cultural power, and it's something obviously the NBA has to deal with, but it's not something obviously that is actually hitting the public sector per se.
Now, do we have though the discussion that's needed to address the issues that you allude to, and that you say? My problem with the president saying that was that he said it in Malaysia, and he said it in front of a president, another leader who has lots of problems in his country that he once remedied, and he said, well, we have problems like you too, and which we don't. But that was my problem. He likes to trash the United States and our history overseas. But that aside,
he was being asked. It wasn't something he was volunteering. He was
asked about Malaysia's civil rights issue, and he brought up our legacy of slavery and this, which we're still wrestling with, and that rubs me the wrong way. But that's just me.
Yeah, and he of course could kind of point out that as he has in fairness as he has in the past, that he as president is an example of how far.
Right. No, absolutely. But what about when we have quote unquote civil rights leaders in this country, quote unquote? Al Sharpton, Jesse Jackson. Jesse Jackson was on the court at the Clippers game the day after they made the announcement, that they were suspending Donald Sterling for life, and Al Sharpton said it's not enough. He wants to meet with the commissioner of the NBA with his National Action Network, and I mean, when these people are the ones that decide what the punishment should be, what justice should be, what should happen in the future. Are we ever going to get anywhere? Because we've gotten,
part of the problem is that the civil rights movement has become as much of a transactional organization, or a transactional series of organizations. I mean, the perfect example that I mentioned it in my article is the NAACP in Los Angeles was awarding
Leon Jenkins, who quit yesterday.
Leon Jenkins awarded Donald Sterling a lifetime achievement a couple of years ago.
And was going to give him another one.
And was getting another humanitarian.
I guess he had 2 lives.
Apparently, and they kept quiet in the face of legitimate criticisms of the way Sterling was running these buildings. Why? Because he paid them off here, he paid them off there. And here's an interesting point: the $2.5 million that the NBA is going to fine Donald Sterling, they said it is going that money is going to be given to various anti-discrimination organizations. Does that include the NAACP?
Right.
So do they get it on
Al
both ends?
Sharpton's network
and the National Action Network? I mean that would be a farce. But this is where we are.
It is where we are, unfortunately. All right, let you listen to something that William Roden from the New York Times had to say, interestingly enough, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar
excellent piece.
Made similar comments to on O'Reilly yesterday. But here's cut 8.
What do you want the players to do before we quit tonight? What do they want the players to do?
Well, this should be the beginning.
Changes.
This should be the first of all, they should stop using the N-word in the locker room. You know, I mean, you can't have it both ways. You can't say Donald Sterling, disrespected us, but then you disrespect each other every day. That's got to stop, number one, or else this really means nothing. If you continue to disrespect yourself and call each other the N-word, then you know what? You are just as bad as Donald Sterling. So stop it.
No, see, I'm not qualified to weigh in on that because people will then tell me
it's a black thing you wouldn't understand.
And people who disagree with Roden, who are black, will say, well, it's a term of affection the way I use it, or endearment the way I use it. So but that can be debated. But what does bother me is this new definition of racism that I think the first one way back, I think Al Sharpton, believe it or not, was the first one I heard say it, that you can't be racist unless you have the power to affect someone. So in other words, if you don't have power to fire someone, hire someone, affect someone's life, you can't be racist. When the definition of racism is the inherent belief that, or the belief that one race is inherently superior to the other.
The belief that one race is superior to the other, and also, buying into the stereotypes of one.
Right. It has nothing to do with having the power to affect anybody.
Yeah.
It's a state of mind.
It is indeed a state of mind. I think Roden is right. I mean, there is obviously this generational issue involving the use of the N-word. But this is the interesting thing. I mean, calling Donald Sterling a racist, I think out and out is fine. And as a billionaire, he obviously has the power to impact other people's lives. But it's interesting in the tape there, he never uses a slur. He talks about,
denies being racist.
He talks about that he doesn't want his biracial girlfriend hanging around with black people, incling Magic Johnson.
No, don't bring him to the game. He says sleep with them.
Sleep with them,
Yeah.
but don't. Which is insane. But he doesn't use the N-word. He doesn't use. There are all these other words that have been used about black people in a derogatory. He doesn't use any of those words. Though it's clear that the racist mindset is there. Meanwhile, you've got you had Congressman Benny.
Well, I was just going to play that for. Well, let me play that for you right now, Congressman Bernie Thompson. Let's go to cut number 20 real quick.
Clarence Thomas saying that he was an Uncle Tom. What did you mean by that?
Well, if you look at his decisions on the court, they have been adverse to the minority community, and the people I represent have a real issue with an African American not being sensitive to those issues.
Calling him an Uncle Tom, though, isn't that a racially charged term?
For some it is, but to others it's the truth.
All right. Well, yeah, we got about a minute left, but I see this as the worst, a bad form of racism.
Yeah, my follow-up column, actually, we're running the Post next week, actually is going to kind of address this, the fact that when it comes to intra-racial dialogue within the black community, it seems that we can't get beyond some of these old, outdated language and just talk about what the issues are. Can a black person talk about things from a conservative point of view? Can a black person talk things from a liberal point of view without getting into some of this old outdated racial
language? And it's the same thing with Harry Reid said Rubio's not really Hispanic. The National Organization of Women, when it was Palin nominated for vice president, said it might as well be a white male. And we just had an openly gay candidate from California running for Congress who said the left is giving him the problem, saying he's not really gay because he's a Republican. So if you're not what they believe you should be, fitting into this little preconceived notion.
It's a different kind
they
of
call you names.
It's a different kind of stereotype.
Great seeing you. Robert
Steve.
George, New
Appreciate
York
it.
Post, ladies and gentlemen. All right, when we come back, you know it, you love it. It is the Malzberg panel. It might be here, might be there, but it's coming. I promise you that much. And we'll come back with it right here on the Steve Malzberg Show, the two-parter. Who's on it? You have to come back and see.